So thank you for joining us today. It's now the third Sunday of Advent and we're looking at the Out of the Ordinary series, the extraordinary. And today's theme is actually pointing to the light, pointing to the light. Just the other day at a Bible study in Revd, we read out these verses that we're looking at today. Jesus was going into a synagogue and he was given the particular lectionary reading to read out. And some of you have heard this before, where it says, "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me," Jesus says. "For the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to comfort the brokenhearted and to proclaim that captives will be released and prisoners will be freed." Just for a moment, I was thinking about this moment where these verses were read out to people in the synagogue who quite possibly have heard them over and over again. But there must have been that sense when Jesus happened to be in that synagogue on that very day and he read these verses out. There was a sense of maybe God's presence in that synagogue as he read those verses out. And as I've been thinking just recently and reflecting on the COVID pandemic and thinking about the conversations that we used to have pastorally on the telephone, and there was a phrase that I'm still using even today, and that is every conversation we have is church. As we can share our faith and pray with one another and to encourage one another. How true it is today that we all have a faith story to share. This is why I very often include a good news item or a time where we can share in our services, giving us time to reflect on others of us who are in the congregation to share their up-to-date faith story or just an answer to prayer that they have had. But here are some questions that have been given to us for further study and reflection. And they're very personal. When was the last time that you were inspired by someone else's God story or their faith story? When did you last encounter God's presence recently? And how do you feel about telling your own faith story? Some time ago, I heard of a minister who had to leave Kiev, and he found himself in Poland along with his family. And he stopped and to help fellow refugees who were leaving Kiev. And his story is how God had provided through different church networks a summer camp that wasn't being used. And many hundreds of people who've been displaced have found themselves living in temporary accommodation in this redundant summer camp. And I can recall back in Lowestoft, just prior to coming to Northampton, where we as church denominations, Methodists, Baptists, Anglicans and Catholics and the Free Church, we all got together to provide facilities then for clothing and for food and for refugees just arriving from the Ukraine. It was amazing how we'd had maybe that break from coming together just after COVID, and we'd set up, if you like, new networks really. And it was an amazing opportunity to not only just serve the church, but also as a fellow members of society and our communities together, along with the council, to really work together to provide homes and also to provide schooling for children who'd literally had arrived with nothing. But this project didn't only bring churches together, but it provided support and help for so many. Besides looking at this theme today of light, John's Gospel is quite probably one of the most theological challenging books. And when I'm sometimes asked about what book of the Bible would you start reading, Ian? And my answer very often is to begin with Mark, because that is one of the most simplest and straightforward stories to read about the life of Jesus. But having mentioned that John's Gospel is very multi-layered, has all sorts of different theological themes running all through it, I just want to give you one simple key to unlock John's Gospel. In chapter 20 and verse 31, it says, "But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." And there is in that Greek, there is a suggestion about this believing, that it will be something that John wants us to continue to do. And that's what we are doing today. We are continuing to believe that Jesus is the Messiah. He is God's only Son, and we are celebrating the incarnation at this Christmas time. In John's Gospel, when he says he came as a witness testifying concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself, it says in the Gospel, was not the light, but he came only as a witness to the light. And I can remember looking at stained glass windows in cathedrals that I visited on a dark and grey day, and light was still coming through to brighten up the inside of the cathedral. And our lives can reflect our beliefs as we go about our daily lives, whether it is a dull day or it's bright sunshine. So to conclude with a short prayer, I've taken the prayer from a CD, a compact disc. Some of you may remember those things, but it was entitled "Come to the Cradle" by Michael Card. It was written and sung by him, and I used to play it to David, Andrew and Matthew when they were very young. I think it was to try and help them to get to sleep after I had told them some stories. But this particular song is called Jesus as the Light. And I want to just read out a small portion of it as we close our reflection today, when we have been encouraged to actually to think about pointing to the light. So the song goes like a prayer. You are the light of the world, O Lord, and you make your servants shine. So how should there be any darkness in me? If you are the light of the world, you are light of the world. You are the bread of life, O Lord, broken to set us free. So how could there be any hunger in me? If you are the bread of life, you are the bread of life, and you have overcome the world, and you have given us the victory. Amen.